Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm standing next to a Land Rover Discovery Series 2, better known amongst its fans as a Land Rover Disco or just the Disco. Now, much like its nickname, the Discovery 2 has a very interesting story to tell. It started production in 1998 and ran through to 2004. This one here is a facelifted 2003 model. Now you might be saying to yourself, Andy, what's so special about this Land Rover Discovery? It just looks like a regular Land Rover SUV. And that, my friends, is where you're wrong. After driving around the Discovery, I came to the conclusion that it's probably the most interesting, most underrated, and coolest SUV I have ever encountered. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about it. So let's start the video off by talking about the exterior, specifically the facelift model. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 2003. It has the facelifted headlights here that you can see, which resemble very closely to the Land Rover Range Rover from the time. Now, moving along to the engine, this car is equipped with a 4.6-liter V8 engine, which is silky smooth. It has 217 horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque. The 2003 model stepped it up to a 4.6-liter engine. I believe the previous model had a 4.2 or a 4.0 liter. But the part that's really interesting about this engine is that it's actually a Buick engine. That's right, this engine is from the 50s or the 60s and it's been modified multiple years over, and it's evolved into this, the 4.6, and this is the last iteration of it. It's made it to a 4-speed automatic transmission, even though you can get it in a rare 5-speed manual. Now, touching point on the first interesting thing about the Land Rover Discovery is right here. You can see that there's like this little SUV looking icon here, and what's housed underneath this is a jacking stand. Now, the Land Rover Discovery, being a off-roading vehicle, has a jacking stand here, and the more interesting thing about them are these things right here. Now, these are I guess floor jacks, whatever you want to call them. They've got this cool Land Rover logo right there, and this is what they look like right there, but that's not what they look like when they're in use. So you flip them around, that's what it looks like here, and these go right here underneath your tire. So when you're at an incline, you put that there, and that prevents your car from rolling backwards. How cool is that? That is one of the neatest things I've seen, and it comes in such a strange place. It's right here underneath the hood, where if this cover was on, just like this, you would say, what the heck is underneath this thing? But what a cool thing right there underneath the hood. Now, the Land Rover Discovery, being the off-roading SUV that it is, it's got all the capabilities that you would want. It's got hill descent control, solid rear axles, a body-on-ladder frame, things that you would have to go to the Mercedes G-Class to get. Now we come up to another interesting point here on the Discovery, and that is the center locking differential. And the interesting point about it is that all Discoveries have a center locking differential, but up until the 2003 model, you weren't able to turn it on yourself. Essentially, you couldn't lock the differential manually. And the reason for that is because Land Rover said that the traction control system is too advanced and blah, 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 blah. So they gave it to you, but they wouldn't let you use it. Now, in 2004, they changed all that, but I thought that was really interesting that a manufacturer would put a mechanical piece into a car and not allow you to use it. But anyway, that's another interesting point. Let's move on to something that I had never seen in any car, period. And that feature is called Super Lock. What the Super Lock is, it locks the car from the inside and from the outside. So even if you were to come through and break this glass, you would not be able to get into the car regardless. And this car actually had an issue with the Super Lock. It had engaged itself somewhat on its own, I suppose. And we had the hardest time trying to figure out how to disengage super lock. And what ended up happening, we had these doors off and we were trying to figure out what the heck was happening, disconnected the battery, reconnected the battery, super lock stays engaged. So one thing that I wanted to let you know, that if you engage super lock, there is almost no way that you are stealing this car. It's almost unstealable from what I saw. The problem ended up being a fuse box. So once we changed the fuse box out, the super lock feature was disengaged and we went about on our happy ways. All right guys, now we're on the rear of the Discovery, and one of the more interesting things back here is this rear glass, and specifically the shape. It kind of goes up this way and it goes up underneath, but the glass back here goes over and back down here. Let me show you what this looks like. Right there you can see it's kind of in a weird shape, and it's made to go around or underneath this spare tire. And when you look at it from the back, you would never expect that that's what it looks like back there, but it does, and I think that's actually a really clever design and another interesting point of the Discovery. The next point back here is this stepping stool, I suppose. This thing is actually really helpful, and I hadn't really seen one of these things in a long time. This thing helps you stand up, get to the top of the car if you need to, and in addition to that, it helps you get into the back third row much easier. Speaking of that third row, and speaking of this quote-unquote trunk, that's the way the trunk opens on the Discovery, as opposed to being a traditional liftgate style opening up to the air. This thing opens up to the side, and in this model, you've got 7 seats, even though you can get the Discovery in a 5-seater configuration as well. But you can see here, these seats are probably the most clever and most interesting folding design third row passenger seats I have ever seen. These are the seats here folded up, and look at where the headrests are. They're up here, and this is how they fold down. Look at that. Isn't that so crazy? And there's one obviously on this side as well. That's how that folds down. Let me show you how the seats fold down. This thing is so clever. Look at the way this is designed. You click this button, you lift it out this way, okay, like that, lock it in, and the seat comes up. Look at that. How cool and clever is that? That is so interesting and so nicely designed, very clever. The cleanup is also really easy. Lower that down, push this thing down, lift it up, lock, done. More cargo space, just like that, really quick, one-handed operation. Really, really nicely done. So the next cool thing about the Discovery are actually the door handles, and specifically the sound they make when you open and close the doors. Listen to this. That sounds pretty satisfying and a nice thump. And I compare it a lot to a Mercedes G-Class. Obviously, it doesn't sound like the bank vault sound, but that was something that I noticed that's really interesting and cool. Next is this window design. Look at how thin this bezel is around this window. Look at that. The glass is huge. In addition to that, it's oddly shaped. You got this sharp angle right here at the top, but I think it looks really nice. Moving down to the door panels here is another interesting thing. You've almost got 3 different types of material. Here it seems like it's like a hard piece of plastic, which is, I think, relatable for anybody who's going off-road. Here is a comfortable suede material, which looks really worn out, but not that bad. And here is the third piece, and this is like a rubber piece. This is for grip, and it feels really nice. And I assume this is really appreciated when your hands are wet, if you're off-roading or they're dirty and grimy. You grab this thing and it gives you a solid closing feel. Okay, so now we're on the interior of the Disco, and there's so much more interesting stuff in here, and I'm gonna start by talking about how visible everything is. The visibility outside of this car is unbelievable. There's so much glass, all the light that comes in, you have no blind spots over your shoulders. The pillars, the B pillar, the A pillar are extremely thin, and it allows for great visibility. Now, moving along, one of the other hallmarks of all Land Rovers, besides the Discovery and the Range Rover and all of those, is the seating position. Land Rover calls this the command seating position. And what that does, it provides this very high above the road feeling. It seems like you're sitting on top of the car, looking out over everybody else. And you can see the hood here. It's kind of damaged, but it's not really impeding in the way of your visibility. Everything you're able to see outside, it's almost like you're sitting on top of everybody driving down the road. I'll touch a little bit more on this during the driving impressions of the Discovery. So the command seating position is actually great. It's a great experience while you're driving. You don't really get that in a lot of other SUVs. Now, the next interesting point here are what Land Rover is very famous for are these extra armrests here. And what these things do is allow for extra comfort, I suppose. They're highly adjustable. You have the ability to raise them up like this and put them down, but you would expect that in this car, right? But in addition to that, you've also got these levers here that allow you to raise, actually let me do it on this one. They allow you to raise the positioning. So let's say if you've got a longer arm or a shorter arm, you want to rest it a little bit higher, or you're leaning backwards in the seat, this allows you to adjust the armrest position in addition to being able to do this and that. So that's another interesting thing related to the interior. Okay, so the next interesting piece I want to talk about is the steering wheel. Now, the steering wheel is interesting because of its coloring scheme. This being a beige car, the steering wheel is in a beige color, but the airbag and the horn and the center section is in a black color. So it's really interesting why Land Rover decided to do this scheme, given that the rest of the car is kind of beige. But anyway, the Land Rover's logo you can see here, I think this logo is one of the better designed logos, period. It suits the Land Rover nature and the off-roading nature of a Land Rover so well. It just perfect, I think. Next, moving into the dash, nothing really interesting there, so I'm gonna kind of skip over that. The next interesting thing I'm gonna move up to is up here on the sun visor. Look at that. That is a little icon or a picture of a Land Rover Discovery, and here you see the measurements of the highest point for the Discovery. You can see here, this is the sunroof, and that sunroof measures up, what is this, 2015 millimeters up from the ground, if I'm interpreting that properly. But that's really cool. That actually looks like a Series 1. Moving away from there, another really cool feature of the Discovery is that it has two sunroofs. Yes, it's got two, one here and one all the way back there. Now, the interesting thing about the Discovery are these sunshades. I'd never ever seen this before in any car. They're split sunshade, so you can have one side open and one side closed. Obviously, both sides open, but in addition to that, you have the ability to open the sunroof while still having the shades closed. How interesting and how clever of a design is that? I really like that a lot. And one other thing about these sunroofs is that both sunroofs tilt and fully extend out, and you have the ability to basically stand up in the back row if you wanted to, having the limousine effect that you see in a lot of movies. So that was really cool and really interesting when I saw that. All right, moving away from the sunroofs, now let's go to the center stack here. Of course, this being a car from the early 2000s, you're not really gonna get a lot of screens and a bunch of infotainment and stuff like that. So this is very bare bones. You got your radio here, you got your air conditioning here. Here's your hill descent control button, your hazard lights. Now, the next interesting thing are the cup holders. Now, let me explain. This car has the most amount of cup holders I've seen in one relative area. So you've got these two here, and these are actually very nicely designed. You have one here that has a larger diameter, and on this side you've got one that's a smaller diameter, but you have this ability to take this placeholder out, and you have two very large cup holders. In addition to that, you've got cup holders here. So you've got 4 cup holders in this small spot. Separately, you can open this up and you've got cup holders right there. So you've got 2, 4, 6. But it doesn't stop there. You've also got more cup holders here. That's 8. So 2, 4, 6, 8 cup holders in this small center section of the Land Rover Discovery. I think that is crazy. And in the day and age when everybody is counting cup holders, you've got a car from 2003 that has 8 cup holders in this small area, and some of them are actually large enough to hold a big gulp. All right, now before moving on to the back seat, I wanted to talk about another interesting point, and that is the stadium seating layout over here in the back seat. You can see that up here there's like this extra roof, and you'll see the reason for that once we get in, but it supports this stadium style movie theater type seating the Discovery has. Back here in the second row, let me open the door here, you can see that these seats are kind of catapulted up much higher than the first row seats sit, and that is to support that stadium seating. The interesting thing about the Discovery and getting in is this high wheel arch. It makes it kind of difficult to get in and out of it, specifically out of it. But let's sit in here and you get this perspective. See, here's the front seat, and this is how I'm in my normal driving position. See how much higher I am compared to the front seat. I'm sitting in more of a command position as opposed to the front driver and passenger. Now, there are some cool things about the back seat of the Discovery. The first one being an extremely clever design, and that has to do with this center armrest here. You look at it and you say, okay, here's a headrest, here's somewhere for somebody to sit, and here's the armrest. But when you pull this thing out, look at what happens. That is your armrest, and this thing folds down to provide more visibility from your rear view mirror right there. So this is an extremely clever and extremely interesting design in this Discovery, and of course you've got the handrest here. The next interesting thing are these grab handles, and typically you see grab handles in sports cars so they can be grabbed onto during high-speed cornering and etc. But this being a off-roading vehicle, it certainly makes sense to have these grab handles for anybody sitting in the back. If you're jostling around, these things provide to be very helpful to keep you stable. Now, the next interesting and probably most interesting thing in the back seat are how convenient and how luxurious, I guess, you have it back here. Look at the air conditioning. You've got your own controls here. In fact, the Discovery has its own air conditioning unit for the front and for the rear. You've got the controls here. Each occupant back here has an air conditioning vent, one in the middle and one here on this side. In addition to that, you've got these reading lights, and of course you've got that sunroof that I mentioned, and this one is also a split folding. In addition to that, the third row actually has their own climate controls here, and in addition to that, there. So the Discovery is extremely accommodating for those sitting in the back seat. All right guys, so now let's start the driving portion of the review. And immediately, like I said, the first thing you notice when you're sitting in the Discovery is that command seating position. Let's hit the road. Hopefully I can give you a better idea of what that really feels like. So as we're setting off, like I said, that command seating position, I can literally see everything around me. From in my peripheral vision, everything is visible. But this gives you this feeling of sitting on top. It's like I'm passing by this Prius here and I feel like I'm gonna like swallow it. I'm sitting so up high, and delivers an experience unlike any other SUV I've driven. More recently, I actually drove a previous generation X5, and it feels completely different than this. This being a car from 2003, and that X5 I drove, I believe, was a 2016 model. This is just so different. The X5 driving position seems like it's inferior to the Discoveries, which is really interesting because that car is maybe about 12 or 13 years newer, and it just goes to show you what a stranglehold Land Rover has on building SUVs. Essentially, that's all they build. They've got the Discovery and then the Range Rover, and now they've gone into the Evoque and such. But let's get back to the driving feel here. So now let's move on and talk about the seats a little bit. This piece right here is extremely underrated. It's something that you don't realize how great it is until you actually have it, because in other cars you've got the center armrest, which is perfectly adequate in this car, but just going from this center armrest to this armrest here, it just makes you feel so much more comfortable. It seems like the designer of this interior was really thoughtful. The armrest here for your left arm is actually in a really nice position. You just feel really comfortable when you're driving this car. In addition to that, the leather is soft, the seats are very cushiony even by today's standards, and separately, adding on to the luxurious or comfortable feeling of the Discovery is the suspension. Now, I'm not sure how off-road capable the Discovery is in stock form, but I can tell you this is a stock car, and the suspension cushiness or travel or whatever you want to call it is very comfortable and very adequate for day-to-day driving. It almost acts like a whole. You take the command driving position, the comfortable seats, and the cushiony suspension, and you've got this really nice, really lofty kind of driving experience. You're driving down the road almost effortlessly. The V8 has plenty of torque down low, 300 foot-pounds in this car, and it's just buttery smooth and silky. You just glide down the road. The steering feel, of course, this is not a sports car, it's an off-roading car. It's nothing out of the ordinary, it's just whatever you would expect from a car from this area. There's a little bit of loftiness, but overall it's comfortable. It doesn't have variable steering, so you're just gonna get the same steering feel no matter what speed you're going at. And separately, the air conditioning works, the radio works, everything is as I need it. The dials in front of me are perfectly clear, and in addition to that, this is a 7-seater, so you can put your family in here, and these things are relatively cheap. You can find one in nice condition for about maybe between $5,000 and $10,000. I think it provides a great value in this SUV crazed market that we're in, and with all these extra cool features that I've pointed out in the video, I think it provides a extraordinary character that you probably will not be able to get in a lot of other newer SUVs. And that is the Land Rover Discovery Series 2. Hopefully I've been able to show you why I think this is one of the more cooler and most unique SUVs I have ever encountered. Thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.